And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the Jeff Mara Podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Dr. Courtney Brown, director and founder of the Farsight Institute, a nonprofit research and educational organization dedicated to the study of the phenomenon of non-local consciousness known as remote viewing. Courtney, thank you for joining me today and welcome.
Jeff, it's a great honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Courtney, can we start with your background and how you got into remote viewing in the first place?
Sure. My entry into remote viewing was really driven by my entry into UFOs, aliens, extraterrestrials, and things like that. And that started when my waking memories when I was born. That was the first thing I thought about that my whole life. And I have a long story about my my own personal interactions, contact with extraterrestrials that I posted recently on our site. But the basic idea is after I finished my PhD, my graduate work, I have a PhD in political science with a focus on mathematical modeling. And after I finished that, um, I went to Africa, where I was a college calculus teacher up through differential equations. I basically taught A-level maths, which is a British syllabus. And then I came back and got my first jobs as an academic here in the United States, UCLA, and I used to teach in the summer at University of Michigan. And then I started teaching at Emory University in Atlanta. Well, after getting tenure at Emory, a bunch of synchronous things started to happening, but I became aware of the military unit that was being released onto the public, mostly into the New Age community, dealing with remote viewing. And so that was an interest of mine. I immediately went and uh, started to learn the military forms of remote viewing, which are basically called CRV or controlled remote viewing. And that resulted in my first book using remote viewing to study extraterrestrial life, and that was called Cosmic Voyage, and that was a bestseller in its day. And it's available still on my personal website, courtneybrown.com, but as a free PDF download. But that also started the long process of creating an institute, the Farsight Institute, where we studied the process, and I really didn't like. I wasn't comfortable with the procedures that were used by the military. They were too unstructured for me. So we started to develop procedures that were derivative of those early military procedures, and they eventually became much more complicated. So complicated that we used pre-printed templates with our remote viewers. And then I eventually ended up writing a science book on remote viewing, the science and theory of non-physical perception. And that went through a 5-year peer review process at a major university press. It didn't get published there, but it was a great peer review process where I got lots of feedback. The book became fatter, bigger, better. And we ended up publishing it differently, but it's still the major book in the science of remote viewing in terms of how it works, why it can work, things like that. And then I continued to develop the Institute, and we decided to become more public. But YouTube was great in the beginning. We were YouTube partners. We enjoyed it, but there was limitations to what we could do with YouTube. So we decided to start up our own streaming service. And we did that. And we morphed from just being a nonprofit, which still exists, to being a movie company, a for-profit movie company. So we're essentially a remote viewing movie company that has a focus on extraterrestrial life. And that's our streaming service is totally equivalent to Hulu, Netflix, Paramount Plus. It's run by Vimeo. It's hosted by Vimeo, and It's totally on the par with all major streaming services, and that's Farsight Prime, one word, Farsight, Farsighd, Prime, Prime.com. And that's where we put all of our content, all of our major projects. Well, as we continued to do more of these projects, we had to train our own people. We used to train people that used to come to us and they would pay tuitions and then we'd come to, we taught maybe a few hundred people that way. They all left. They all left by saying, this was the most amazing thing I've ever learned. Thank you so much. This was really great. You've changed my life. But they didn't stick with us because they weren't using it. They weren't doing it as a profession. They were doing it as a hobby, as a sort of a just an interesting thing. And then they went off to do crop circling in London, or they went off to do having tea in Zurich or whatever. Anyway, then we decided to find our own people and not to have them pay us, but us to pay them. And we started to collect our own group of remote viewers who would use it as a profession, that they would actually stay with us like forever. And that's the group of people that we work with today. So my son is in that group, of course, but he wasn't one of those ones we had to discover. He saw me and grew up with me. But the others we actually found, and we picked them basically on whether they were really great in front of a camera, because we realized in order to change the planet, we had to get people that people wanted to look at. So we started to work with a lot of models who were fabulous, charismatic on the podium. They're mostly art models. They would pose and then artists would be around sketching and stuff like that. And I asked them if they would be interested in, learning remote viewing. They didn't know what it was about, but they were interested. And we did end up teaching them. Became really strong supporters of the whole thing. And they became the absolute best on the planet Earth. And I mean that. They are the best. But the reason they're the best is because they stuck with us. They're dedicated, and uh, this is their job. This is how they pay their rent. So they became full-time professional remote viewers. So they produce content that is not paralleled anywhere else. And we have a huge amount of content on farsightprime.com where people can see everything they do. Over 50 major movies, which is, remote viewing projects that we call mysteries. And then we have a regular monthly shows that we sort of similar to TV shows that come out. We have a bunch of other things that come out as well. But that's the history of remote viewing. So we've segued from sort of a nonprofit that did some teaching and research to a movie business that really projects out. And we are now, without any ambiguity and now without any dispute, the largest public venue for remote viewing studies anywhere. There's nobody that comes even close. We're the only place where you can find full public projects using remote viewers who are highly trained and do all of their work under very defendable, totally blind conditions, meaning they are not told what the target is. They were just told, do this, and they get it from a text on my phone or an email saying, do a target. And that's all they're given. And then you get like 4 or 5 descriptions, all recorded live on video, where they really are great presenters of the results for that target. And it's amazing to see them describe the same thing each time. And that's what we do. Now, I want to say also we've segued this year. And the basic process that we do with Farsight is we spent the early years developing essentially a complete revision of history of humanity, meaning we have discovered that everything that's basically been said about everything going back thousands of years is just wrong. There's so much that's not correct, from how the dinosaurs were killed off to how all religions started to and a lot of it's all extraterrestrial involvement with this planet that goes back like forever. And what we discovered was we had to not deal with mainstream ideas with archaeology or mainstream ideas with regard to almost anything. we had to rewrite the entire history of humanity. And so we came up with over 50 major projects that essentially do that. But to accept what we do, which really corresponds well with the archaeological evidence, for example, the Great Pyramid of Giza, no one has ever figured out how they moved those 80-ton blocks. And there are other megalithic structures that have blocks that are way bigger than that. You can't carry those on the back of a donkey or a camel. And the crazy ideas they come up with how they moved and cut those things from the quarry is just nuts. Our remote viewing results make total sense of how they cut and how they move those blocks. So the correspondence between our findings and the reality on the ground really makes sense. But in order to believe any of our stuff, you had to believe that the stuff we were talking about, especially with regard to the extraterrestrials, was real, especially when a mainstream, both government and science, is saying there are no extraterrestrials. What are you talking about? So what we did in 2022, new cameras came available that allowed us to start taking video recordings of UFOs, very reliable. So what we started starting in January of this year, the last step of this whole disclosure process, you don't have to buy into remote viewing. You don't have to believe me. You can say totally disregard everything Courtney says, disregard everything Farsight does. You don't have to believe anything. What we're doing now is proving, and I'm using the remember, I'm an academic at a university and I focus on math. So the word proving means something to me. I'm a scientist. The word proving is not something you just throw around. We are proving now that extraterrestrials exist and that the UFOs are real. Because the new cameras came out, it is now possible for us to not show you the picture that will convince you, because any debunker will come along and say, that's a smudge, it's a glitch, or you did that with Photoshop. They'll say anything. What we're doing now is we're teaching people how to take their own photographs, their own videos of UFOs. What we have found out is that the UFOs are absolutely omnipresent. You don't have to have a special photo that was taken in 1986 and you're little fuzzy and you're trying to wonder, and the Congress needs to have a new congressional hearing on this thing, or maybe a military task force to study it. Nothing like that. In any 10-minute period during the middle of the day, right above your head, anywhere on the planet, there's 20 or so odd UFOs right there, right in front of you. You can't see them because they're using cloaking tech, and they travel at often over 20,000 miles an hour. You just simply can't catch them on video. But now they have cameras that can shoot in 4K, and the 4K is important, 4K at 120 frames per second in infrared. 4K, 120 frames a second, and infrared. That combination that just became available in 2022. January 2023, we finally started to use such cameras. We used the Panasonic Lumix GH6 cameras that have been converted to be able to be full spectrum. And then we put a filter on that allows us to pick the exact nanometer for infrared that we want. And that's when they're there. They're everywhere. A 10-minute video you'll see, and you see the ships, you see the shapes, you see them moving across the sky. And to give you an example, we are starting to post images on our, so people can see on our, really easy on their phones, because people have phones everywhere. On my Instagram site, which is Courtney Brown Farsight, COURTBROWN. No, I'm sorry, COURTNEY, Courtney Brown, like the color, and the word Farsight, FARSIGHT. And Instagram, we have a whole bunch of photos of videos up there of these things. It's a small sample of the literally hundreds that we have, where we're posting them up as we go on every month. And you can see them, and you can see them clear as day. But it has to, but and you can't shoot them at 30 frames a second or 24 or 25 frames a second, which is a normal video, because they go like 20,000 miles an hour. All you see is one dot. How do you know what that dot is? But if at 120 frames a second, you can see them move across the sky. And then you have to use infrared in order to actually see them, because they use cloaking tech. And you can't see them in visible light. They're totally invisible in visible light, but they're overwhelmingly present. So that's what we're doing. And that's the final stage. Once you accept that the UFOs are real, not because someone told you, they showed you a picture, but they showed you how to make the picture yourself. So once you convince yourself that the UFOs are real, it's a game over. It's a game over because then you say, well, then everything else is correct. The establishment, the government, the media, they've all been lying to us for how many decades? So then the remote viewing stuff becomes very real because we're showing them how to prove to themselves without being told by anybody else. They did it with their own cameras, they process it on their own computers, and they see it. That's what we're doing now. So it's the process of making that disclosure happen.
That's amazing. If we go back to your son that you mentioned, who works with you contacted him pre-birth. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we just released a video. This was coming. See, the disclosure process is coming. And I had to describe my own my own experiences with extraterrestrials now because the disclosure process is so close. So we just put up a video you can see it on our website, on YouTube at Farsight. Farsight is the name of our YouTube channel, so it's up there. It's my own personal background, but it's also on farsightprime.com. But this one was so important that we decided to release it full on both YouTube and Farsight Prime. And you can introduce yourself only once to people. So I knew if I delayed in telling that information, somebody else would define me later, and then I'd have to try to correct the record. Because when people lie about you, it gets to be a real mess when you try to correct those impressions. So I had to get this out in the beginning. So we decided now was the time because the disclosure process is now inevitable. So the basic thing is that when I was around, when I was young, 8, 9 years old, I was always fixated on extraterrestrials. I had 2 gray guys, the grays, the wraparound eyes, short guys. 2 of those would be on my bedside on either side. So I had 4 of those on my bed, and they weren't things that I had to drag up in memory and hypnosis. They were just there. I saw them, and they would be there, many, many, many nights. And I just didn't know what that was all about, but they were there, and I just grew up that way. I had a whole history of contact with extraterrestrials that I'm not going to go into now. But um, later on, when I was older, uh, my son, who was not yet born, but in his mother's stomach, I meditated, say, 4 hours, 4.5 hours a day in the morning and the evening. He would visit, and he would visit, and I can. This is a complicated issue for why most people can't see these things. There's a reason why most people can't see these things. But when somebody dies and they pop out of the body, I can see that person. And there's a reason why you're supposed to be able to see that person. There's a reason why most humans can't. And I'll go into that later if you want. But I can see that person. So my son used to visit me while I was meditating. And he was a pretty serious person. He used to sort of have his hands crossed like this. He had this like white gown, sort of like an Arab shock, like smock type of Arab gown, white gown. And he used to just stare at us. And he used to just stare at us while we were meditating. Anyway, he was the one who told us his name. I say when he sort of can come into your head also and communicate especially when you're deeply settled. And one of those times when he was standing in front of me, actually about 6, 7 feet away in the corner there, the meditation room, he would come into my head and I'd say, actually, and who are you? What's your name? And he said very clearly, I am Aziz. I said, oh, so that's your name. Okay, so we'll name you Aziz. Yes, I am Aziz. And he was also different communication, but he was also on a different, he was really, really upset with me about how I felt about the extraterrestrials. I was at that point, this is 30 years ago. At that point, I was thinking all that needed to be done was to wake up humanity and get them to accept that the extraterrestrials are real and it's going to be this wonderful thing. We'll be able to fly around in ships. And he was so upset. He was so upset. Take a ping pong ball and go into a small closet with no clothes in it and smack that ping pong ball as hard as you can. So it rattles all around. That was him in my head. he was so upset. He was having a temper tantrum. You don't remember why you're here. You're so stupid. Why, the whole thing. I said, now look, if you're going to be my son, you got to be respectful. You can't do things like that. Anyway, but after he was born, he was as telepathic as I was. Everyone is supposed to be telepathic and being able to see people that you normally can't see. Like someone when they die in the ISB part, we don't use the word soul or spirit. We use the word ISB, someone who is simply for the purpose of being. And the ISB part, you can't kill a person. It's impossible to kill a person. You can trap them, you can confuse them, you can do all sorts of things with them, but you can't kill them. So um, the ISB part of 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 us is supposed to be telepathic, and there's a reason why most everybody on the planet can't do that. I'll explain that if you want later. But um, my son was clearly telepathic, and for example, and there's a story I put in the video that's very humorous. I don't know, you might want to hear. Is I was up at the University of Michigan teaching my nonlinear mathematics course, and I just went to one of the porn shops on downtown Ann Arbor, where in the old days they used to sell magazines, like Hustler and Playboy. They used to have naked pictures inside them. But I went into the porn shop and I bought some porn. I was going to show it to my wife and get ideas about things to do. Anyway, they put it in a brown paper bag, and I took it and I wrapped it in the brown. I kept it in the bag and I stuck it in the apartment we were in. And at nighttime, I hadn't taken it out of the bag yet. And at nighttime, my son's mother decided, Aziz, it's time to go to bed. We're going to take you to bed. So they were walking up the steps, but he was hesitant and he looked back at me and then he looked up at his mother and said, "But mommy, daddy's looking at pictures of naked ladies." And she just grabbed him. So like, there was a zillion other examples, but that was sort of funny. So so my son and I sort of grew up with Farsight, and we both evolved and figured out. We had to figure out with our own projects what the full story of the extraterrestrials it is. It's a very complicated story, and it's not simply they're good guys and we're just stupid idiots that need to wake up and accept the extraterrestrials are real. It's way more complicated than that. But that's the process of that's the long and short of my son.
Well, you mentioned that we should be telepathic and we should have the ability to see spirits leave their bodies, or ISBs. Why don't we have that ability?
I'm going to tell you the answer, but it's only understandable if you look at a bunch of our projects and you understand the full picture. But this is the summary of what is clearly evident in our projects. This planet is being run as a prison. There was in the galaxy, say going back a million years, a Holocaust that was worse than anything that you've seen on Earth, a galactic Holocaust. And one of the things they tried to do, if you look at authoritarian powers like the Soviet Union, China during Mao, and all that type of stuff, authoritarian powers try to keep their populaces inside. They don't let them leave. And that's very important because the populations would otherwise leave. And so they had to control them. So one of the things over the millions of years that the technology evolved is to catch people. It used to be that death was a means of transportation to get out of a place and to go to someplace better. But they developed the technology to be able to catch the ISBs after death and then recycle them. And what it is ISBs, what most people call souls or spirit, but that's who you are. You're an ISB. The body is just a machine. It eventually fades, it eventually drops off, and there you are as an ISB again. ISBs, they cannot be killed, period. Period. They cannot be killed. So any religion that tells you if you pray hard enough, you may be granted eternal life, that's that's fraud. You can't be killed no matter what. However, you can be caught. ISBs are attracted to beautiful things. They're attracted to aesthetic things. So after you die, you see the light. That's part of technology that's been put out to attract the ISBs, like moths are attracted to a light. The ISBs go towards the light and then they get caught up. And it's like a fly trap. The more you struggle against it, the more you get caught up in it and you can't get out. And once you're in it, you get zapped with an electric type of thing like high voltage that's way higher than lightning. The voltage is in like billions of volts. It's really, really, really high. It can't kill you, but it can rattle you. And what happens is you lose your memory of who you are. In some society, in most free will type societies, when you die, you don't lose your stuff. You don't lose your memory. You keep your house. You can come back. You don't have to like here in this world. You die and then vultures come and take all of your stuff. You have to put a will out to know who's going to get it. In other places, you don't lose your stuff. So what happens is the ISBs get rattled. They lose their memory. They lose also the ability to not only remember things but telepathy and remote perception. And so what happens then? It's all done by AI. There's no like beings that are doing it. It's all controlled automatically, so it can be processed with enormous numbers of people. And what happens then is new memories get inserted in to fill the blank. And if you have a near death experience, that's fascinating because the same type of thing happens, but almost inevitably, you're confronted by someone who says that your situation has been discussed by the Council of Elders who thought very carefully, and they think it would be better for you to go back because you have a few other small things you need to work out in your life. And then you think about it, oh my gosh, these very kind council of elders think I have a few more things. Yes, there must be a few more things. And then they go end up recycling back into the body, and the near death experience is over. Well, first of all, there is no council of elders. It's all done by AI. Second of all, you don't need another lifetime. It's impossible to kill you. So you've been around for millions of lives in the first place. What is one more lifetime going to do? It's nothing. It has nothing to do with anything. What it is, it's a recycling program to get the people to come back in. So as it is now, this used to be really extreme back in the old Egypt pyramid days when we found out there's a group of authoritarian type ETs. They used to run everything back in the Egyptian pyramid days, and everybody was a slave who worked with rocks. That's their ideal situation of a prison. There was a military confrontation back then. It sort of knocked them out of power in terms of being overt. So they had to do it more covertly, but they still are dominant on the planet. But they can't run it like they did back in the old Egyptian slave pyramid building days. So those beings have, long story made short, they have agreements with the U.S. government and a few other governments, including the Israeli government, as described by Hayim Ashed, former commander of the Israeli Space Directorate, not in dispute. Yes, the agreements were signed, and the ETs work in bases underground. The governments were tricked into signing those agreements. That's another project that we did called Operation High Jump. But the governments were tricked into signing those agreements with a group of extraterrestrials. There are two different groups. We call them the reptilians and the Orions. They're normally competitors, but they're allies of convenience right now on the planet. And they operate in bases underground. And there's another group of ETs which are dominant in the solar system temporarily and more powerful, but the oppressive authoritarian ETs are dominant on Earth. And we're heading towards a crisis where new agreements have to be formed, and the oppressive extraterrestrials are going to offer to fix the crisis if they sign new agreements. The free will ETs obey these free will agreements completely, almost fanatically, and they will leave the system at that point, and there'll be nothing stopping the extraterrestrials that are oppressive, authoritarian types from doing anything they want. But right now they have a few checks because the free will ETs It's a struggle now, like a war going between the free will ETs and the authoritarian ETs. But right now, the dominant ones are the authoritarian ones on the planet Earth. All right. So the reason you don't have the telepathy or the remote viewing capabilities is because of being processed by these things after death. We call them the death traps. They're like fly traps that electrocute people, put in new memories, and cycle them back. There may be 8 billion people on the planet. Maybe, I don't know how many, but I'm guessing maybe 30 billion ISBs around the planet. None of them can get out. So the death trap process has slightly deteriorated because of the military confrontations that have occurred. It's still operating, but it nonetheless is a little bit less dominant than it used to be, which is why people are starting to remember some things. For example, the buildings that we have now with skyscrapers, they resemble the types of buildings that you have in other places in the galaxy. You're starting to get more of the remembering of what people used to be like, but it's still not full. But a normal ISB that has not been zapped can is normally telepathic. The extraterrestrials, you've seen this a lot. For example, David M. Jacobs, the retired, just now retired professor from Temple University, he's written a number of books. The most recent is the best of all, which is Walking Among Us. He has interviewed lots and lots and lots of people who were involved in the abduction experience. And one of the clear things that come across is they don't use words like speaking like we do. They don't speak English. Well, they can be taught English and they can speak English when it's necessary. But the extraterrestrials dominantly use telepathy simply to communicate. Whether they're flying a ship and they're being told what to do, orders, it's telepathic communication. Now that seems alien to us, to humans, but it's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be alien. We are in a situation now where people are saying, mainstream science is saying, well, prove that it can even exist, that telepathy can exist. When from a larger galactic perspective, it's like, what are you, crazy? It's like, that's like saying, prove that you have to breathe, that you're supposed to breathe. But it's a natural phenomenon that occurs after the zapping experience in that death trap thing. And it apparently lasts for some lifetimes. It doesn't fade.
What is their benefit of trapping us here?
Oh, it's very clear. There's two things that go on. In the sort of holocaust of the galaxy that took place, and again, all of this is spelled out of all the major projects that we've done. But the one thing is, there are a lot of situations where they had to get rid of people all over the galaxy, and they needed a prison, and this was a convenient place to put them. You can't kill an ISB, but if you can banish them to a prison where they're locked up, you get rid of them. Now, the people that they banish are, first of all, let's talk about the bad ones. They banish anyone who's like a pervert, anyone who's got a criminal history, things like that. That's why you see so many bad things happening on Earth, why you see so many school shootings and other stupid things that happen, terrible atrocities and things like that. Those people have been banned elsewhere and thrown here, and they act the same way. Their personalities are the same, so they do bad things here. But also, in these societies, which are like a million years old, they've invented everything that can be invented. And when some creative person, inventor, comes along and says, "No, I want to do something new, do everything," it ends up irritating those people. Remember Socrates, who put to death in Greek, just because he asked questions down at the marketplace. So, people get upset whenever someone tries to do new stuff. So what you have here on this planet is the highest concentration of artists, inventors, creatives, geniuses anywhere in the galaxy. They irritate people out there because they're always trying to shake things up, and these places don't want to be shaken up. So you get an enormous amount of people there, so it's coming here because of that. The other reason is this place used to be, a few thousand years ago, it used to be a place of refuge for refugees from the places that were controlled by the authoritarian ETs. So when they had bad situations and people were trying to escape, they had the same death trap type of processes there. But in some of them, some places they found a way to escape. There is a way you can actually get out, but it was hard, but they found a way. And they started to come in here as refugees. This place was not normally considered an optimal place to have a civilization, so major civilizations didn't happen here. We have a it's basically the planet is a balloon with a very thin 8-mile thick crust, uh, covering you know, a 4,000-mile diameter, no, a radius of 4,000 miles, um, or an 8,000-mile, you know, ball. It's a liquid ball of molten rock. So we have a thin crust on top of a huge ball of molten rock, and things happen with the sun and other things where it rattles it, and it eventually gets major changes, and civilizations can be wiped out in a blink of an eye. This is not a stable place. It's really great for flora, fauna, animals, plants, things like that. But for people to live for 1 million years in a stable geological environment, this is not so great. But for refugees trying to flee someplace, this was a perfect place. So a lot of them came here for that reason. Then the authorities and the authoritarian regimes found out about it, and they came here and they said, "Well, if they're already here, let's just lock it up." And that's where the death traps got installed around the planet to lock it up, so that now that they're here, let's keep them here. And then it became known that this was a place where people couldn't get out. So other places started to throw their perverts and deviants here as well, just a way to get rid of them. Remember, you cannot kill an ISB. So if you want to get rid of them from your society, you got to get them out and suck someplace else. So that's where we are right now, where we have an interesting population from the best to the worst, but a huge concentration of geniuses and artists and inventors and stuff like that. So if the disclosure happens, we could then harness that intellectual power to start figuring out how to disable and dismantle the death traps. But you have to have disclosure. But once you do that, that can be a topic. And we have the brain power to try to figure out how to do that. It's apparently across the entire galaxy very difficult to disable those death trap things. They're very well constructed.
You mentioned a crisis is coming soon. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, you see it building. You see the things happening. You can sort of see things happening in various countries. China, President Xi is getting older, and you can see that they're getting more and more overt about talking about getting Taiwan back. Actually, they never actually had it. It was always an independent. It was always an island that mainland never governed. But nonetheless, they consider it part of China, and they want to have it back. And that's ratcheting up. Now, Japan and Korea, they take these things very seriously. Japan, that used to be a basically almost demilitarized place since the end of World War II, they're cranking up their defense spending at least 2% a year in terms of GNP. And in just a few years, and I'm talking maybe 3 or 4, it will be the second or third largest military on the planet Earth. Japan's really cranking up their militaries fast. They're not doing that because it's just fun. It's expensive, and they're building it up for a reason. So you see another crisis coming along, which is the Ukraine situation. The Ukraine situation is interesting because Russia invaded it despite all logic saying, "What? What are you doing? There are no more wars on the European theater. What are you talking about?" So they invaded it. And despite all logic saying the opposite, but it looks clearly that the Ukrainians are going to win that war. And it's unclear what Putin's going to do, but clearly the motive is going to be there for him to use tactical nuclear weapons because his conventional forces are not going to be able to do it. And if you have a situation where China looks like it's going to invade Taiwan and possibly, you know, have instability across all of Asia, and Russia might be thinking of using tactical nukes in Ukraine in order to get them to submit, it would be a situation in which the oppressive authoritarian ETs would simply go to the um, American and Europeans, but mostly Americans, and say, "We understand you have a problem. It's terrible. It's awful. Uh, how about we fix it for you? We can fix it. Just sign here. And what they want is another agreement giving them extended free will treatment agreement to stay on the planet Earth and to continue their operations in secret. And that's what happened after Operation High Jump in Antarctica after World War II. The the reptilians had supported a Nazi base, and what happened is the Americans and the Allies beat Germany in the European theater. Then they discovered there was one Nazi base left. It was in Antarctica. So they sent Admiral Byrd plus a flotilla, an aircraft carrier. An aircraft carrier never travels alone. It always has 13 ships. That includes a repair ship, destroyers, submarine, a whole flotilla, plus tons of aircraft. It went with over 5,000 fully armed troops, 13 ships, aircraft carrier, planes, everything, down to Antarctica immediately after the conclusion of the European theater for the World War II. And the American government said they're going down to do a reconnaissance mission to see if we can find a place to put a landing field. What? You send one boat in order to do that, or maybe an aircraft. You don't send a flotilla fully armed to the teeth. Anyway, what happened was they got their ass bit. They were just beat. They got crushed. They had a whole bunch of. They thought they were going to go down and have a Nazi base that they were going to clean up. And that'd be the last of the Nazis. But they had a whole bunch of UFOs that came out and just hit all the aircraft, the American aircraft, and they had to retreat. Now, the Americans thought that the Nazis were actually flying the UFOs. They weren't. The Nazis were on the base, but they were not skilled to fly those things. They had other people, extraterrestrials, who looked very Aryan, for that matter, but they were the ones who were actually flying the UFOs. The Americans thought they were Nazis. They didn't understand the extraterrestrial stuff at all. And then when Admiral Byrd came back, he actually mentioned it in an interview he had in Chile. But when he came back to the United States, they apparently did a buzz of the White House, and the Americans were totally rattled. They were saying these UFOs, Nazis could knock out the entire U.S. military in like half an hour. We had to do something. At that point, the reptilians and the Orions, they came and they made an agreement with the American government. Where they said, basically, we understand you have a problem. Nazis in Antarctica sounds terrible. Hey, we'll take care of it for you. Just sign here. So they signed the agreements, and sure enough, they took care of it. They took the Nazis off planet. There's no Nazis down there in Antarctica now. And so that's how they got the current agreements. The new agreements would be because of this new thing that's brewing. And that's going to be very interesting to see how that pans out. I've been very vocal about urging the U.S. military to not let that happen. Do not let those agreements be signed. If the Americans and Europeans sign those agreements allowing the current oppressive extraterrestrials to continue operating here on Earth, the free will ETs are going to leave the system. They're going to leave. And then we're at the mercy of just dealing with there'll be no checks on what the oppressive extraterrestrials can do. So anyway, that's the situation that we're heading towards. We're heading towards a repeat of what happened after Operation High Jump.
So many things to talk about. You've covered so much stuff. I'm kind of trying to decide, where do I want to go next?
Well, let me say this then. All of this could be dismissed if there are no extraterrestrials. That's why the new thing that we're doing at Farsight is so important, proving that extraterrestrials exist and the aliens are there. When you see that it's not just one or two ships caught in some year, but over their head at any time of the day, like 20 ships at any moment over your head, they're just omnipresent everywhere. When you see that by taking your own video recordings, after we show you how it's done, what kind of camera you use, and how you process the film, how you process the footage, then it's a game changer. Then you say, oh my gosh, they're all over the place. And they're trying to keep themselves hidden. So obviously they're oppressing, because if they wanted to let us know that they exist, if they were encouraging disclosure, they would just be visible in visible light. but they're obviously trying to keep themselves hidden. And it's not like they just have one or two ships. They have a zillion of those ships right above our heads. So once you realize that that's real and you've proven it to yourself by taking your own video recordings, then everything else becomes okay, very credible.
Are you saying that you can take a camera and point it in any direction in the sky and you will record ships?
Let me say that we normally shoot our videos straight up, meaning we have multiple cameras at the same time, and we capture these things on more than one camera, and we usually have our cameras pointed straight up in the sky. So, and the reason we do that is because it's easier for us to estimate speed and direction when we have our cameras set so the top of the camera is heading north, and everything is straight up, then we get a panorama of the sky. But yes, the answer is yes. You can do that at any time. Like right now, you're in San Antonio, correct?
Yes.
If you had the proper camera, you could go out right now in the middle of the day, put it on a tripod, shoot 10 minutes of video at any time of the day. 10, but it has to be during the day because we're using infrared, and there is no infrared at nighttime. So it has to be during the day when there is infrared. A properly configured camera, point it straight up. Don't shoot more than 10 minutes, and take it down at your computer and process it the way we tell you how to process it, and you'll see them right over your head. Not one, not two. You'll see you'll see so many things. You'll be saying, "What do I do next?" Some of them will be small white dots moving around in irregular patterns and things like that. Others will be really close. Others will swoop down, and you'll see the different shapes. You'll see everything, and it's amazing at what you see within 10 minutes. The reason we say don't shoot more than 10 minutes is because you have to process the film by slowing it down. And you have to look at it. You're shooting at 120 frames a second. So you got to watch at 120 frames a second. So it takes quite a while, a few hours to look through 10 minutes of footage. Because what happens is you're seeing these things. If you play it back in real time, what you'll see is, huh, something happened. What was that? And you stop it and you go back and then you expand it so it goes real slow and you're looking at 120 frames per second, real slow, and you'll see it. It'll fly across. That's so they're going over 20,000 miles an hour in the atmosphere, but you see them clear as day, the shapes, everything. Yeah. So the answer to the question, long answer, but the answer is yes.
I'm surprised at even 120 frames per second, you're still capturing them.
We were grateful that we could do it. You still see them leap, but you see them leap like a frog, uh, close enough that you can clearly see the movement. And again, if you want to see some examples, go to my Instagram page, Courtney Brown Farsight. It's on your phone. Just look at a few of them and you can see them. We have pictures of UFOs flying right past jets, like coming out of Atlanta Hartsfield Airport, and where the jets are obviously moving really slow and the UFO is like whoosh, rushing past it, but you see it clear as day. And it's a cigar-shaped UFO. It's not even close to being ambiguous. Some of them we see really big, and some of them you see more small. Some of them are little dots, white dots flying around. Um, but it's like they're there all the time. The answer to your question is yes. So once you prove to yourself that the extraterrestrials are real, and you realize they're trying to hide themselves, then you say, well, then this is an oppressive system. If they wanted to show themselves, they would be visible in visible light. They're trying not to do that. So what are they up to? And then the whole idea of the oppressive side of it becomes clear. And the whole idea of not trying to discover are ETs real? What you're trying to discover is the magnitude of the of the repression that is being orchestrated by the authorities. That means the oppressive extraterrestrials have the political authorities and the media, the mainstream corporate stuff in their pocket. Now, the free will ETs have no access to the major political elite. That's one you should understand. The major political elite are all bought off by either bought off through bribery or threats or mental manipulation, but they're in the pocket of the authoritarian regimes, authoritarian extraterrestrials, which dominate on the planet. And if you say, how can you say that? Take your camera out, capture the videos yourself. You'll see hundreds of them right above your head in a short amount of time. Then you'll say, okay, well, they really are there. Then now it's impossible for you to tell me that the US government doesn't know about this. We got cameras that could take these videos in 2022. You can't tell me that the military didn't have specialized cameras going back at decades, but that's when we got these. Now, we couldn't do that part of it until 2022. We started after we had to get the money to buy the cameras and get everything set up. So we started in January 2023. Okay. Panasonic Wilmix GH6s converted to full spectrum with infrared filters on them, shot at 120 frames in 4K. Now, why the 4K is important, if you shoot at 100 and if you shoot at 1080p, which is normal resolution for people to watch things on, you can't zoom in. So in post, you can't zoom in when you're editing the footage. So you need 4K in order to be able to get closer to them, to zoom in, to make sure you see their shapes and to make sure they don't have wings. All bugs have wings. So you want to make sure it's not a bug. You want to make sure it's a aircraft or some type of spacecraft. So you have to zoom in. That's why the 4K is important. 4K means you're using a lot of the sensor. Recording 4K at 120 frames a second, that's hard because you have to write that down. It's easy to record 120 frames a second. I mean, it's easy to record 120 frames a second if you're shooting 1080p, which is just a small, not much information. But 4K is 4 times the size of that. And so we had to wait till consumer grade, semi-professional or professional grade cameras came out that could do that at 120 frames a second. And it just happened last year. So that's why we are doing this part of the disclosure process now. Again, we're not trying to show you the picture that will convince you. We're showing you how to take the picture that will convince you.
10 minutes of video, 4K at 120 frames per second has to be massive file sizes. They got to be huge files. So you probably got to have a pretty powerful computer to even work on that.
Yeah, we use a pretty powerful computer. Although we bought a recent laptop. I'm traveling around the country, starting to travel around the world, actually, showing people how to do this in presentations. And I hope to be giving a presentation this summer at a major university. So I have a laptop that's specially configured. It just came out. It's a Hewlett Packard's absolute best laptop. And it has 32 gigs of RAM and 2 gigs of dedicated video memory and a fast thing. And it can do it on a laptop. So, but normally we use a big machine. The machine that we use is normally right next to me, and it's a heavy machine, and it has an incredibly good graphics card. And this is the type of machine we normally use. Let me see if I can point it towards you. You see that machine down there?
Yeah.
Well, that is like state of the art best. You can't get much of a better computer than that. So that's the type of thing we use, but you can't carry that around. So that's got a really fast AMD processor. It has 64 gigs of memory. It has the latest graphics card in it. And yeah, we use that. So, and we can scrub through that footage very easily. However, I have a laptop that now can do that pretty well, and that will work when I go to universities and other places to make presentations, and I show them how to process the video how to edit the video footage in order to see it. Because remember, if you just play it back, even in IR, you'll just see things like something flashed in the screen. What was that? You sort of thought might have been just something, for half of us, or a quarter of a second, you saw something on the screen. Maybe you have to stop it and then expand it and then look at it slowly at 120 frames a second. And then you see the ship come out of the side and come through and it curve, and you see the shape of it and the whole thing. But yeah, that's what we do.
Why do some people see ET ships and they have lights on them, which to me means they want to be seen?
You occasionally have that happening. Now, the free will ET ships want to be seen. The free will ET ships want this type of thing to happen. But This is a prison planet. It's controlled by authoritarian regime. Even if the dominance right now in the solar system is militarily in favor of the free will ETs, they don't control this planet, and they respect the damn agreements that were signed that were back in the back in the Operation High Jump days after World War II. Those are getting older though, so new agreements are going to have to be signed. If they don't sign those agreements, the free will ETs will interact. However, just think of it. The free will ETs can't just invade this place. If they invaded this place, it would be like the US and the European allies invading China or Russia. What would happen? The populations of China and Russia, they would demand that the governments defend them. They would say, no, this is terrible. So if the free will ETs came in here and said, we're freeing you from the oppressors, it would backfire. The whole population would rise up. The government would say, "Oh my gosh, this is a terrible thing. We got to defend." And the oppressive ETs would then join in the fight, and the whole planet would be opposed to the free will ETs. So you couldn't just invade them and say, "We're trying to free you from the oppressors." It won't work. You have to have a revolution from below where they demand the intervention of the free will ETs, and then the oppressive ETs are caught in the middle, and then they would leave. Mind you, if there was a total collapse of the oppressive ETs, they wouldn't mind destroying the entire planet because the death traps are still operating. They would just collect everybody and take them somewhere else, start all over again. So, in order to get everybody free, you had to have a revolution from below to force the disclosure process to actually happen. The free will ETs have been heavily involved in Hollywood, book authors, and things like that. Script writers, they seed information into the heads of the scriptwriters. Now they believe in free will, so the scriptwriters don't have to accept the information, but they wake up in the morning and say, "That's a great idea." And then you get a new movie of Star Wars. You get a new movie. The Matrix comes out with the whole idea of a population that doesn't even know it's being mentally controlled, but it's controlled. All these ideas are being fed into the population to get us ready for the idea of extraterrestrial contact disclosure, and to get us ready for the idea that there's battles going on. The whole Star Wars saga is based on the idea of there being a galactic struggle. That's correct. There has been a galactic struggle. It's sort of calmed down now. It's not like as active as it used to be, but there is a this is the leftover, and this is a prison of that leftover struggle. The trouble is the free will ETs have a huge number of friends and relatives that are on the planet. That's of the billions that are here, a lot of them came out of the free will areas, and they want to get them back. That's why the free will ETs are investing so much. The other thing is that this planet, with all these ISBs, you can't do anything in the galaxy without an ISB animating it. You need them for military forces, mercenary forces, you need them for prostitution, you need them for trafficking of all types. These authoritarian regimes need ISBs in order to expand. You got billions of ISBs stuck here. This is a resource that can rock the galaxy. It's really important. And the free will ETs don't want to have that happen. So getting this place dissolved and freeing these people is important. But you have to have the revolution from below. So this whole idea of us having remote viewing projects to sort of rewrite the history of humanity, and then the final stage is proving to everybody that the extraterrestrials are real, that they exist, by showing you how to take the video recordings yourself. That's the final stage for triggering this disclosure. When it happens, it will happen fast. Now, the free will, let me just add also that the free will ETs have tried in the past to free the planet. They did it by having all major religions result from free will, from some intervention from extraterrestrials. They had situations where ideas were being seeded into the planet. And then the idea would be that those ideas would percolate into civilizations for a few hundred years and change the population from below. And that would produce a better population, and you could get them to throw off the oppressive ETs and things like that. It didn't work. Every single time it doesn't work. You had the Greek and Roman gods, which were set up by the oppressive extraterrestrials, who were real people. Those people were like Zeus. He was a prison warden who was a serial rapist. the guy was real, and he flew around in his chariot, which was an ET ship. But he should be in prison. He's not somebody to worship. All of those Greek and Roman gods were existing, but then when the ideas, the sort of the Christian ideas came about of saying, love is the thing that drives the universe, forgive, and all that stuff, that was disruptive to the idea of hierarchical control. And so that had to be corrupted later, and you got all the Greek and Roman gods got transformed into saints out of the Catholic Church. And so you had a saint for everything that the Greek and Roman gods used to do. And you got that transformation into that. And then the whole messages got messed up. So things that happen slow, they found out just don't work. They have worked sometimes in the past on other planets, but they don't work here. So the difference now is we're trying to trigger it so that the disclosure happens quickly. And if it happens quickly, then the oppressive extraterrestrials won't be able to control the situation like they can if they have a few centuries to work on it. That's why we're gearing up for this. Anyway, that's where we are now.
Well, I guess it's a difficult situation because you would like all the geniuses and artists to get out, but do you really want the bad ones to get out?
That's a good question. I don't know how we're going to answer that one. I'm not going to be involved in that decision-making process, but it's a good question. There are lots of perverts, bad people, murderers. Yeah, they're if you can't kill an ISB, so if they do bad things in other places, they want to get rid of them. You can't kill them. So throwing them into a place like this is awfully convenient. I've even heard that they might have some people from another galaxy that they threw some of their prisoners here because it's sufficiently far away that if they ever did get out, they wouldn't get back to that galaxy. That's not a major thing. Apparently it's a rather minor, but nonetheless, it's happened. Banish them to a place where they can't get out and make it far away. So this planet is sort of not in the center of the galaxy. It's sort of far to the side. It's 2/3 out. So it's a convenient place to throw people and then put them in a prison and then walk away. So, yeah, you have to deal with those people as well.
I want to go back to the beginning. You said a couple things, and I want to get your input on them before we finish up here. You were talking about the pyramids. How were they built?
That is our project, the Great Pyramids of Giza. They were built with ET tech. They had ETs there, but they were behind the scenes. They weren't like up in front of everybody, but they had them there, and they usually work through human proxies. But the technology that was used was coordinated with the people that were used to do it. So they had the regular slaves, the human slaves, but they also had workers that looked like artificial. They weren't artificial beings, but they were genetically engineered beings that had very limited mental capabilities. They weren't going to revolt, that type of things. They don't exist now, but they did exist back then. They were designed to do a lot of the mining. The mining was under extremely adverse conditions. The smoke and everything that came out was terrible. They cut the rocks with something that you might consider similar to a laser. Whether it was a laser or not, it was a light beam, and they cut the rocks that way. That's how they got those perfect cuts that go, 8 feet, 80-ton blocks that go like 20 feet. The line is absolutely perfect. You can't even stick a hair between the rocks in the Great Pyramid. They perfectly match up. The lines are perfect. So they used light they had these light cutters. That's how they cut them. And then they lifted them, not with the physical means, like on the back of a camel or rolling them on logs or anything. They lifted them through a means of lifting them, like levitation. Sound was actually a part of the levitation, and they actually have, you can see some videos on YouTube where they use ultrasonic sounds to lift objects, and it works quite well. But these sounds are used with devices that actually lift the things, and then the people just push them. It's like pushing gently. You don't have to push hard, and you push them into place that way. That's how they got these huge numbers of huge heavy blocks to fall into perfect place, so that there's no cracks, You can't stick a hair between the rocks. They're perfectly lined up. And it's not just a couple, but a lot. Now we have a project on that called the Great Pyramid of Giza. And so we had two remote viewers sort of go into that sort of heavy. There was Dick Algeier and Des Smith. And they describe under totally blind conditions, they didn't know what the project was, and they weren't communicating with each other. They both described the exact same thing. They described the pyramids, they described how the blocks are moving, they described the populations that were involved in cutting those things. But that's how it actually happened. And that's the only thing that makes sense if you look at the actual stuff on the ground. If you look at the actual geologic, if you look at the actual evidence, archaeological evidence of what's there, no human created theories make sense. No mainstream orthodox theories make sense. And they have other blocks and other megalithic structures that are even longer than that, bigger, longer, heavier, just like right off the scale. And you say, well, how did that happen? So the ETs have been very careful at scraping off all of the extraterrestrial technology that was used back in those days. But the evidence on the ground of the things like the pyramid is really overwhelming.
What about the dinosaurs? How were they wiped out?
That was very interesting. The mainstream idea is that an asteroid came back, crashed, and created a nuclear winter, and the dinosaurs died out. That's not correct. There was more than one rock. And a very common method for warfare among extraterrestrials is to throw rocks, to throw asteroids. The Earth was a reptilian place. They did have dinosaurs, but they also had intelligent extraterrestrials that were reptilian that lived on the planet at that time. They did not come from this planet. They weren't they didn't evolve from this planet, but they lived with the dinosaurs and they were sort of in tune with nature. They sort of lived here and it was sort of harmonious and that type of a thing. But the reptilians ran the place and they had sentient thinking, stand upright type of reptilians along with the rest of the dinosaurs. A group of human looking guys in ships, same type of ET ships you see up there now, they came in and they really wanted the battle had happened in the galaxy already. It extended here. They wanted the reptilians out of the solar system. There's been a nonstop confrontation between the reptilians and the humanoid types. And their first weapon was to gather a bunch of rocks, big rocks like asteroids, just like the mainstream said, but they didn't randomly hit the planet. They were thrown at the planet. The ET ships took the rocks and threw them. And that caused this huge nuclear winter. The reptilians that were space alien reptilians that were on the planet tried to get out in their own ships at that time. And the humanoid ships that were around the surface shot them down as they were trying to escape. So it was a classic situation where you could authentically say it looked like genocide. The idea was to wipe out all reptilian life on the planet, let mammalian life come out, and then to seed the planet with human type people. And that's because of a struggle, a wartime struggle that had been happening for a long time between reptilians and human types. I say humanoid type because they often look like us, but they're clearly not reptilian. And so that's how it ended. So the mainstream is sort of correct. Rocks were involved in crashing. What they don't get is that there was more than one rock, and B, they don't get the idea that there were ET ships surrounding the planet that were shooting down the extraterrestrial reptilians that were trying to escape at that time.
Well, you've given us a ton of fascinating information that me and probably the audience are going to have to digest all this. If people want to find out more about this, do they go to your website or your YouTube channel?
Well, the YouTube channel has less than farsightprime.com because that's our streaming service. But the best thing to do is first go to my Instagram page so you can see a few of the UFOs that we're recording. And that's free and it's on your phone and you don't even have to go to a computer. So just go to Instagram, Courtney Brown Farsight on Instagram and just look at a few and then say, that's strange. Okay, so the next thing is probably people would want to go to farsightprime.com and people can get a free 1 week access to the entire site just by putting in an email. They can get a free email. They get a free 1 week. You can see everything. And then we have different tiers. Also, there's you can see there's a bunch of stuff for people who just register with an email. They can see our tutorials on how to do the remote viewing, and some of our classic projects, the 9/11 projects, the Great Pyramid of Giza project, things like that. But and then on our YouTube, we have a website also, farsight.org. That's for the nonprofit, where we list all of our projects, and also we have printed instructions there on how to take the video recordings of UFOs, what cameras to buy, what filters to use, what lenses, things like that. So Farsight, we have two websites, farsightprime.com, which is everything. Then we have farsight.org, which is a nonprofit that has some instructional materials as well. And then we have our YouTube channel, which is just Farsight on YouTube.
Courtney, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
I'm make it like this. We're now in a period of disclosure. I'm honestly telling you this. We don't know how it'll turn out. It could go either way. But never before in the history of humanity have you had so many resources pumped into this system on the free will side ever. I don't know how it will turn out. Both sides think they can win. I'm clearly aligned with the side of the free will ones. But now is the greatest possible time of opportunity for the freedom of the entire humanity. I can't tell you how it's going to turn out, but everybody on the free will side is betting the kitchen sink that we can do this. If we don't do it, we'd have to withdraw and go to another place in time and space and try again. But never before has such a major investment happened to make this thing happen, to make this thing real. So I can't tell you the outcome of the story, but I can tell you that we wouldn't be investing all of this if we didn't think it was really possible to do. But all of your viewers have to understand they have a responsibility too. They have to participate in their own emancipation. Step number one, prove to yourself that what I said is correct by starting with proving to yourself that the extraterrestrials are real. And then you'll know that the government's been lying. You know that the media's been lying. You'll know the truth. Prove it beyond any shadow of a doubt by looking at the pictures yourself. Secondly, start filling in the rest of the story. You're supposed to be telepathic. The whole galaxy works with people who are telepathic and who can do remote perception. Don't fuzz out with the idea that telepathy is weird. That's supposed to be normal for everybody. To get your skills back, to get your abilities back, to be able to do that is possible. But don't dismiss it as impossible just because it doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen automatically for a reason. Nobody can kill you. It's impossible for anyone to kill you. You do not have to be granted eternal life. It's yours by default. The only thing you need to do is to accept your own self as the eternal being you actually are. So start with proving to yourself that what I've said is true. Don't ever believe what I say. Prove it every single time. I've said the ETs are real. They're above your head all the time. Take it upon yourself. Make that challenge. Prove it that what I told you is real. And then go to the next step. See what else you'll know. And that's how we get disclosure to happen.
Courtney, thank you for that message, and thank you for being my guest.
It's my great honor. Jeff, it's been a great thing to be on your show. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for watching the Jeff Mara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.